Thank you everyone so much for joining us. We've reached the top of the hour and it's time to start our workshop on safety leadership, 4 skills that build cultural excellence with David Crouch. Before we move ahead, just a quick note about safety for our virtual meeting. Wherever you are listening from today, please know the following for your location: emergency phone numbers from your desk and/or cell phones, your desk and room location, your take cover and evacuation alarms and routes, any room hazards that you need to be cautious of and aware of. Please also be aware of your surroundings. In your location, please also note who to call or who will call for emergency numbers, who will perform CPR, who will use an AED, and what to do with fire extinguishers in the event of an emergency. And as always with all of our meetings, we ask to please be safe, be present, and to win the right way. Before we begin, here are just a few quick guidelines. You will be muted throughout the presentation, but you can still stay engaged throughout the presentation with our question and answer feature. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box throughout the presentation. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Also, a recording of this presentation will be made available following the event. Please feel free to email the presenter with any follow-up questions you may have. Again, thank you so much for joining us for today's virtual workshop, Safety Leadership, 4 skills that build cultural excellence with David Crouch. Before we jump into our workshop content, I'd like to introduce our subject matter expert and presenter for tonight, David Crouch. David Crouch is currently the Director of Research and Development for Caterpillar Safety Services, which is part of the CAT Solutions Group, and has served as an organizational development professional since 1979. His experience, passion for excellence, and a values-driven approach helps David be relatable to people from various industries and environments who are pursuing excellence within their organization or personally as a leader. He has a Master of Science in Organizational Development and has authored 2 books, The Excellent Experience and 12 Steps to Excellence, How to Build a Great Team. All right, that's enough for me. I'm going to turn over the floor to David.
Well, thank you, Laura, so much for that kind introduction. I appreciate that. And thank you, everyone who's joining us this morning. It is morning on the East Coast, and wherever you are, we're glad that you're here with us for our discussion today about safety leadership, 4 skills that build cultural excellence. Well, after 42 years experience in the field, safety management expert Dr. Dan Peterson concluded that safety incidents are primarily due to leadership failures. As a matter of fact, he went on to say in an article in EHS Today in 1996 that leaders must do certain things on a regular basis to create the type of culture that produces safe behavior in employees. Now, he didn't know exactly what those things were, but he said that organizations must unleash their leadership potential on safety problems. Well, now, if you're like me, I would imagine that you too have known intuitively all along that leadership has a significant influence on employee behavior and culture. But what we haven't known is exactly what those things were that Dr. Peterson was talking about, that leaders need to demonstrate every day to create that type of culture that produces safe behavior in employees. Well, in 2012, Caterpillar Safety Services chose to seek the answer to that question, and we launched our research project then. After 5 years of diligence, we discerned 4 domains and 14 elements of safety leadership, basically 14 skills of leadership that leaders must demonstrate, and that forms the content for our conversation today. So specifically, what I'd like to do is I want to start out with a brief introduction to leadership in general, and let's just level set our conversation, if you will. And I want to talk about how leadership affects culture so that we're all on the same page there before we dive into the actual 4 domains and 14 elements. Then we'll discuss those 4 domains. The domains are really just big ideas of leadership. And within them, there are 14 elements or skills, if you will, that leaders need to demonstrate every day. And we'll talk about those and explain those in detail. And then we'll finish up by talking about how companies have been using this methodology over the past couple of years to assess their leadership performance and then strive and work to improve it. So that's our agenda for the day. So let's get started. So the current state of leadership, what's going on with leadership today? And here's some stats that I thought might just help us get a handle on that question. Well, the average organization is forfeiting over $1 million a year in untapped potential due to weak leadership practices. Disengaged employees cost the U.S. economy up to $550 billion a year due to lost productivity. It's a lot of money. Of that, about $86 billion in losses results from disengaged leadership. So we have an issue. Now, 86% of companies rate developing new leaders as urgent or important. So most organizations realize that leadership development is critical. 85% of executives, however, aren't confident in their leadership pipelines. And 61% of companies offer no leadership training at all. So we know leadership's important. It's costing us a lot of money. We know we need to develop our leaders. We're not confident that we're doing that well. And most organizations, 61%, aren't even doing anything about it. We have an issue. So today's conversation will offer at least a potential partial solution to that issue. Now let's talk about how leaders influence culture. So wherever there's a leader, there's a culture. Wherever there's a group of people working together toward a common objective, there's a culture. So let's talk about that and define what we mean by it. Let's think about it from a safety perspective. And really, there's only 2 types of culture. Every group has one. So the question is your culture an intentional culture? Are you creating the type of culture you want and need to sustain your business at a level of excellence? Or is your culture unintentional? Are you not deliberately trying to create a culture that drives toward excellence? So let's look at it from a safety perspective. Let's say there's an incident in your organization. Something happens. Somebody gets hurt. Well, the first question that we ask when we do an incident analysis is what happened? Why did this incident occur? We try to understand that issue. And there's really only 2 reasons, right? There's either some type of condition in the workplace that created the incident, and that could be, let's say, a machine machine guard was not properly placed back on the machine. The operator was using that machine, and it ended up injuring them in some way. Well, that's a condition. The machine guard not being in the proper place is a condition of the environment. But most incidents occur, according to all the safety experts today, most incidents occur not because of conditions, but because of employee behavior. People choose to do something, to take an unnecessary risk that results in an incident occurring. So now the question is, why do people do that? You know, that the data shows us that about 90% of all incidents occur because of at-risk behavior. And even the other 10% that are condition related have in the root cause some type of behavior that led to that condition being present in the workplace in the first place. Somebody failed to put that guard back on the machine properly that resulted in the incident. So if you think of it that way, nearly all, 99.9% of all incidents that occur either have at-risk behavior as the primary cause or somewhere in the root cause. So why do people do what they do that leads to an incident? We know it's not because they want to get hurt. Nobody comes to work today and says, today's my day to get hurt. So there's some other reason. Now, most incident investigation processes stop right here. They try to find out who did what and end up disciplining the person or having some type of conversation around that to try to prevent it from happening again. Now, the safety department might try to implement a new policy or procedure as a result of that, and we're done with it. But there's more at play here, and we haven't considered culture if we stop here. Well, what we've learned is that people do what they do, take a risk or not take a risk, because of attitudes, beliefs, and ideas they have about the work they're doing. Let me explain. So, is it possible, do you think, that somebody in your organization may have the idea that you actually want them to bypass safety protocols? Could they possibly believe that to be true? I'll tell you, it's happening. Now, so what's going on there? Now, we believe that most leaders, I personally believe every leader, well, that's an absolute. So I would say most leaders um, come to work every day and try to do their best to lead people effectively. No leader wants people to go home hurt. We all, I believe, have that right intent. But is it possible that sometimes those that we lead misunderstand our intentions? Is it possible that even though we want them to work safely, sometimes we may communicate something different? Let's say I walk onto your job site and you run a construction company and we have a project going on, and I walk onto the project job site. One of the safety protocols is that when you're in the work area, you're supposed to be wearing a hard hat. Let's say I don't have on a hard hat as your leader, and somebody in your work team doesn't have one on either. And I walk by your work area and you believe that I see you, and I say nothing about the hard hat missing. Not only do I not say anything about the hard hat that's missing from someone in your team, I'm not even wearing one myself. So what might people in that team think my attitude is about wearing hard hats in that scenario? Is it possible they might think I don't think it's important? Now, the reality is I do think it's important. And so here's the thing. Is it possible that I'm not even aware that I'm communicating that? Well, of course it is. What if I just come out of off of a phone call in my pickup truck with the boss, and we were talking about the project timeline, and we're way behind on our timeline, and we're way over budget? Is it possible I might have that on my mind, and I may forget to put on my hard hat? Is it possible that that preoccupation I have may cause me not to even notice that one of your team members is not wearing a hard hat? Of course that's possible. It happens all the time, right? So you see what I mean? We unintentionally may be communicating things to our folks that we lead that we don't intend to. I do want you to work safely. I want to role model that myself, but sometimes I don't do that. And it's not because I intend to communicate it's not important. It's because of the human condition. Something else is going on there. So employees have attitudes, beliefs, and ideas about the work that lead them to think it's okay to take a risk, or maybe even that we expect them to. Why would we expect them to take a risk? Well, let's say I come off of that same phone call out of the pickup truck, and I walk up to the work team and I say, guys, we're behind schedule and we're over budget. Now we've got to pick up the pace. Come on, guys, get with it. Get with it. Let's go. We got to get this work done. Now, if that's all I say, is it possible that some, if not all, the team member thinks they'd better do whatever they need to do to pick up the pace, even if that means not walking to the shed to get a lanyard if they need to before they climb up on the scaffolding, or even if it means bypassing some safety protocols, perhaps walking out on a beam without being tied off, and so forth. You see how we can affect their thinking unintentionally if we're not deliberate and intentional about the way we communicate. So this whole conversation today and the whole methodology around safety leadership is designed to help us understand that issue and communicate with others in such a way that we communicate our intent that they work safely most of the time. We're not perfect, so it's not going to happen all the time, but most of the time we want to communicate and interact in a way that communicates to them that it's important, that I expect you to work safely, and that I'm going to do that myself. Now, what we're talking about here is norms of behavior. What do most people do most of the time? That's my favorite definition of norms of behavior. And when you talk about norms of behavior and what most people do most of the time, you're talking about a culture. That's what culture is. Culture is not determined by what's in the rule book, what's in the policy manual, or what the boss says. Culture is determined by what most people do most of the time. What are those norms of a behavior among the work group that everybody understands? I guarantee you, if I come to work for you tomorrow, within a short period of time, I'll understand what your norms of behavior are. How will I know that? Well, two main things, right? I'll know it because my boss is communicating it to me, but probably more importantly, I'll notice it by what my boss does and says and by what people around me do. Even if the boss says wear a hard hat, and even if he wears his hard hat when he's around us, if most of the team members don't wear theirs when he's not around, what am I likely to do? It's very possible I may not wear mine as well. So we're influenced by two major factors there, right? We're influenced by our leader. We believe that most people try to do what their leader expects, what their boss expects them to do, and we're influenced by our peers. So that's culture, and that's what's in the root cause of people doing what they do. It's why they do what they do. We've got to consider that when we're doing an incident investigation. I try to get encourage leaders that I work with to the first question after an incident to the person who was involved, not why did you do that, but what were you thinking when you do that? Is there anything I have said or done to lead you to think it's okay to take that risk? I need to know that because I realize that many times my influence on you as a leader could have affected your attitude about that work. And I need to understand if that's the case. So oftentimes, most of the time, there's a cultural impact or a cultural influence on why people do what they do. Now, this is the reactionary approach. This is an unintentional culture that we've just described here. We haven't, we're just reacting to these things as they occur. So how do we turn this around and make it intentional? Well, first of all, we realize that in the root cause of every incident, there's probably a cultural effect, a cultural influence. So we want to realize that first of all, and realize that there are leading activities or things we can do to influence the attitudes, beliefs, and ideas of those we lead, so that they have the right attitudes, beliefs, and ideas, positive attitudes. They have the belief that they know. There's no doubt in their mind that wearing a hard hat it is expected, and that's what they're supposed to do. When they do it, they work safely, and they probably get some kind of positive recognition for that. And if they don't follow those protocols, then there's some kind of coaching or there's some kind of a conversation that follows. So the proactive approach is where the culture drives the positive attitudes, beliefs, and ideas. And when that occurs, then people work more safely. They know that that's the way we work around here. That most people work safely most of the time in our group because that's our culture. And the result is more positive safety results, fewer people getting injured. So the big question here is, for you that I have, is what are you doing? How is your personal behavior as a leader influencing the attitudes, beliefs, and ideas of those you lead? Bigger question. How is the leadership performance of your entire leadership group in your organization influencing the attitudes, ideas, and beliefs of those you lead? What type of culture, what are the norms of behavior that you have established because of your leadership behavior? Well, what we're talking about today are skills that leaders can demonstrate every day that generate or create the positive attitudes, beliefs, and ideas intentionally so that people work more safely. And we actually have data to show you that when you behave this way, you create a safer place to work. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, in 2012, when we decided to try to answer this question, we had certain assumptions or hypotheses, if you will. We agreed with Dr. Dan Peterson that there are certain leadership characteristics that if we demonstrate them on a regular basis, that it will build a stronger safety culture. So we wanted to find out what those were, and we believed if we could find out what they were and validate that leaders would then need to live those out every day, and that would create that intentional culture that we're talking about. But we wanted to be able to also assess a leader's performance relative to that thinking, and then once doing that, we could then work to improve leadership performance. So that's where we set out in 2012, and that's the result of what we have here today. We studied a lot of information at our that was available to us. Our own data. We've been doing safety perception surveys. Caterpillar Safety Services has for over 30 years now, since the late 80s, early 90s. We studied what Gallup had to say on it and some other well-respected research companies. We looked at other assessments of competitors. We worked with some known leadership authors. We also studied about 150 leadership resources, and so on and so on. So we did our due diligence and tried to figure this out. We worked with DDI, Development Dimensions International, and partnered with them because they're experts in assessment, development, and validation. And they helped us with that process as well. We tested what we had, they validated it for us, and then we have what we're going to share with you today. So the result of all that work was the discernment of 4 big ideas around leadership. We call them domains, and 14 elements within those 4 domains that are basically leadership skills that we as leaders need to learn and develop to a high degree of excellence so that we can create that intentional type of culture that we just talked about. The assessment itself is comprised of 85 observable behavior statements that route to the 4 domains that we just talked about. Observable behavior statements are things like, the person I report to positively recognizes me when I work safely. And then we have a Likert scale of 1 to 5, from strongly disagree to strongly agree on those 85 statements. That then forms a score within each of the 14 elements and 4 domains, and we can then measure and improve our performance relative as a response to what people see us do every day. So here's the framework: 4 domains and 14 elements, and let's dive in. I'm going by that one quickly. We'll go over them one at a time. Domain number 1, drive accountability. As leaders, we need to drive accountability into our teams around what we expect people to do. Dr. Peterson said you can't get a culture of safety excellence without it. So what are we talking about? Well, accountability, you know, it's funny. Let me share this with you. When I ask employees, frontline employees, that question, you know what I hear most often? Accountability is discipline. Somebody's in trouble. Now, why do you think employees would give us that response as a definition for accountability? Now, there's no question that a discipline might become a part of accountability system, but it's certainly not all that accountability is. But do you think perhaps employees form their opinions about what accountability is based on how we interact with them? If there's an incident and all we do is find out who did what and then issue discipline, could it be that that's why they think accountability means discipline? Certainly. So our behavior then has influenced what they think about this topic. Well, it's a lot more than that. Discipline might become a part, but it's a lot more than that. Basically, it's accepting responsibility for what you're supposed to do. As a leader, it's my job to make sure, if you're on my team, that you know what you're supposed to do. And then I interact with you in a way that reinforces that and helps you do it more often and better. There's a concept of holding people accountable versus taking accountability for your role. One is a leader's responsibility to hold others accountable. Taking accountability is the personal perspective. I want to take accountability for my role. And I think as leaders, we'd like everyone on our team to take accountability for their role. But we have to set that up in the way that we interact with them. And we just call that holding people accountable. And that's where we're coming from in this discussion today. And accountability is certainly not blaming. It's the opposite of blaming. It's not trying to figure out who did what and blame them and then issue some type of reprimand or a negative response. It's helping people learn what they need to do and helping them do it better and more often. So when a leader creates a culture of strong accountability, everyone knows what's expected and how it's measured. High quality training is provided, and it's engaging training. It's not the sit in front of a video kind of training. High quality engaging training so that we ensure that they know how to execute well on those expectations. Everybody has the resources they need to work safely. It's our job, it's our responsibility as a leader to make sure they have what they need in order to fulfill those expectations. And they receive appropriate feedback for the work that they do, both positive and developmental, in order to steer them towards safe performance. So let's look at these 5 elements of accountability, and I'll just discuss each one briefly. Element number one is clearly defined expectations. Now, by the way, this is the only one of the 4 domains where these 5 elements form a process. This is really a process, or 5 elements of accountability, that if you execute on these in this order, you can create a strong culture of accountability and drive it into your team. So if you report to me, it's my responsibility to make sure you have clearly defined expectations. I need to make sure that you know what you're supposed to do. According to our data, most of us do that pretty well. A lot of times HR helps us there with a job description, but whether it's written down or not, it's my job to make sure that I clearly communicate to you what is expected in the role that you're in. Now, once I do that, I need to make sure that you receive effective communication on how to do that right. We call that training, right? I may not do the training, personally myself, but I'm responsible for ensuring you get high quality, engaging training so that you know what good looks like and you know how to execute on those expectations. I also need to provide the resources you need in order to execute those expectations. Reminds me of a story. I was working with an underground mine in the heartland of our country in the US, and the miners I was having a conversation with them, and we were talking about resources, and they told me a story that has stuck with me. You know, underground mines, basically what you're doing is you're digging out the earth and moving dirt and uncovering the coal. That's what they were doing. Well, machines do most of that work, but many times the miners have to grab a shovel and move what's left and clear out the dirt. So they need a shovel. It's one of the tools they need, one of the resources they need to do their job. Well, they told me that shovels were so scarce that in order for them to have a shovel tomorrow, if they got their hands on one today, they would hide it somewhere in the mine so they could have it the next day to work with. Why did they have to do that? Their perception was that the mine management was so concerned about the budget that they weren't willing to supply more shovels. That was their perception. So in their eyes, they weren't able to get the resources they needed in order to fulfill the job expectation of clearing out the dirt. So that's a case where sad, in my opinion, and shovels aren't that expensive in the scheme of things when you consider the financial parameters around running an underground mine. So that's a leadership behavior that was frustrating to those that were working in the mines. It's our job to make sure they have the resources they need. Now, once we clearly define what's expected, we have engaging, high quality training so they know what goods looks like, and we provide them the resources they need to get the job done. Next, we move into an execution phase. And so now they're on the job site where they're doing their work. This works, by the way, regardless of what level of the organization you're in, frontline leader, middle management, top leader, it doesn't matter. This still applies. So then we need to pay attention to what they're doing on a regular basis. So we just call that measure performance. We have to pay attention and assess the quality of their execution. And we do that because we know what they're supposed to be doing. We know what good looks like, and we assess against that. And then lastly, we provide them feedback based on the measurement phase. So if I observe you wearing your hard hat, and we've been having trouble with people wearing hard hats, how important would it be for me to let you know that I appreciate you wearing the hard hat, and I appreciate you setting an example for the rest of the crew, and you're doing exactly what we need you to do because we want everybody to work safely. So if I provide that kind of feedback to you, do you feel better or worse about wearing the hard hat? Hopefully you're thinking you feel better. Now you might be thinking, well, that's ridiculous. People ought to know they're supposed to wear a hard hat. And I would agree that in a construction zone, people should know they're to wear a hard hat. But if they're not, then we have to do something about it. What's the norm? Is the norm in your team to wear proper PPE, or is it okay especially when the boss is not around, to not follow those protocols? So the leader has a tremendous influence on what those norms are by virtue of our feedback. So if they're doing what I want them to do, I should let them know. If they're not doing what I want and need them to do, I also need to address that, and we call that coaching to improve. So you notice I haven't used the word discipline yet, and we're all the way through the 5 elements. You know, discipline only comes into play as a last resort. So if I've coached to improve and coached to improve and coached to improve, and quite frankly, in my experience, most leaders give that plenty of opportunity for people to respond. And if the person is not responding and following safety protocols, then I have to do something else. And most of you probably have some type of progressive disciplinary policy that you would enter into at that point. But it's the last step that we would take, not the first. So if we, let me ask you this, if you try to drive accountability into your team using these 5 elements or steps, if you will, do you think you would have people responding by behaving more the way you want them to or less? And I would suggest to you that they'll be behaving more like you want and need them to do. And if this becomes the norm, then your employees will make sure that other employees follow those protocols and do what you need them to do. They'll begin to manage themselves. If it's the norms of behavior, they won't let people not wear a hard hat. If you walk onto their job site in an organization or a team that has a strong culture of accountability, they won't let you stay there without a hard hat. They'll say something to you, even if you're the president of the company. And that's what we're talking about happening. All right, so that's accountability. Those are the 5 elements of accountability that we need to demonstrate every day. Domain number 2, we need to create connectivity. What are we talking about? Well, John Maxwell says everyone communicates, but few actually connect. So what are we talking about when we're talking about connectivity? Well, as leaders, we need to make sure that everybody is integrated into our team, and we need to make sure that our expectations and our norms of behavior are integrated across levels. And we need to make sure that safety is integrated into the operation. So integrating safety and all the behaviors we've been talking about up and down the org chart with one another so that it's all connected. And doing this requires a strong command and communication skill. As a matter of fact, I would suggest that all execution of all 4 domains and 14 elements we're talking about today requires a strong command of communication skill. Now, because of that, let me just mention this. We do have a 2-day leadership development experience around these 14 skills. But before we get into those 14 skills, though, we spend the first half day on communication because it's so critical. So we try to make sure that all the leaders that we work with understand the power of their communication skill and the type of the way they need to be interacting with others to communicate effectively. So we spend several hours on that before diving in. It's that critical. So when a leader creates connectivity, everybody understands that safety is integrated into the entire operation. It's not a bolt-on. It's not something that the safety department manages and supervisors and leaders in the line of operations just make sure we get the job done and the project complete. No, it's integrated. Safety is everybody's job, and that's not just a placard or a saying on a sign. It is the truth. It is actually what happens. So every leader at every level has a responsibility when it comes to ensuring that everyone operates safely. It's an equal area of focus with production, quality, finance, customer service, reliability, whatever your metrics or important areas are of result that you're trying to achieve. These are common with most organizations. So safety is an equal partner with those. It's not that we have a job to do. Then we have a safety department to make sure we do it safely. It's that we have a job to do and we need to do it safely. It's all integrated. And that's our norm of behavior. It's our culture. Employees are involved in identifying and solving safety problems. Connectivity means connecting everybody into the system who is a part of it. For example, if we want to try to improve our pre-shift safety meeting, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to get the people involved in pre-shift safety meetings to help us do that? There's a principle at play here, and that is that people are much more apt to support what they help to create. And so if we want folks to buy into this new way of doing safety meetings, wouldn't we have a much better chance of that happening if we involve them in that solution, in creating that solution? So that's what employee involvement is all about. Now, that's just one way to involve employees. There are many ways to involve employees. But as leaders, we need to involve them in the process. It's not a dictatorship. We're not managing anymore like we did 50, 60 years ago. So it's people respond now more to respect, cooperation, collaboration, and involvement. And everybody's kept informed of all the relevant safety information they need in order to work safely. So there's an information sharing piece of connectivity as well. So we've discerned 3 elements that we can measure in the connectivity domain. And we just talked about them briefly, but let me review. So we need to involve employees in the process of safety. Involving them in changing procedures like we just talked about, or processes. Involving them in safety meetings. If I'm a supervisor, I don't have to be the one to conduct the whole safety meeting. I can get others involved. Involving them in all aspects of our safety system. People are much more apt to support what they help to create, so involve them, and that connects them in. We need to share information. We need to inform them of the things they need to know in order to work safely. When we become aware of something new, we need to share it. And that one's pretty straightforward, I think. And we need to make sure that safety is integrated into the entire operation, and that it's integrated into the way that we communicate. Remember my example earlier when I walked onto the job site and I didn't have a hard hat on, and somebody in the team didn't have one on, and I didn't say anything? As a matter of fact, maybe all I said was, guys, we're behind schedule, let's pick it up. Well, I didn't integrate safety into my communication in that situation. If I had said, come on, guys, we're behind schedule. You know, we have got to get this job done on time. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't want anybody taking any shortcuts or taking any unnecessary risk at all. I want you to follow safety protocols. But let's see if we can't figure out how to pick up the pace a bit. And then somebody in the team would probably say, well, boss, do you realize you're not wearing a hard hat? And I would go, oh my goodness, thanks for letting me know. I didn't even realize that. I'm going to go get mine right now. So there's how my communication should go if safety is integrated. So not only in the organization or from a big picture perspective, safety is an important strategic imperative along with production, quality, customer service, and finance. But it's also integrated in the way that we interact with others. So let's look at this a little bit deeper. So let's go to that pre-shift safety meeting now that we mentioned, and let's consider how we connect everybody into that expectation. So let's say we've decided that we've had a team of employees and frontline supervisors working with us to create a new pre-shift safety meeting. And here's some of the things that they decided that people need to do to make this a high quality experience that makes it a safer place for us all to work. Well, let's think about the employee's role then. Everybody has a job. So what's the employee's role in the pre-shift safety meeting? Well, it might be something like this. We expect them to attend, of course. We expect them to actively listen, that is, be mentally present in that meeting. And we want them to speak up if they have something to add to the conversation. And then we'd like them to encourage others to do the same thing. So there's some things we might expect an employee to do in a quality pre-shift safety meeting. Well, what about the frontline supervisor, the frontline leader? What would we expect that person to do relative to that meeting? Well, they're probably the one that's responsible for getting it organized, for making sure that it runs effectively. They can, one expectation may be we want them to involve others. Remember, that's a connectivity element, getting others involved in that meeting. And then wouldn't it be great if they positively recognize people when they add value and speak up and do what we expect them to do? Remember that feedback from accountability. So we're employing those skills in this safety meeting as a frontline leader. Some of the skills we've already talked about in this methodology. Well, how about the middle manager? Does the middle manager have a role relative to a pre-shift safety meeting? That's a good question. A lot of people we ask that would say probably not. We would beg to differ. And the role is pretty critical. What Dr. Peterson found in his 42 years of experience is that this is the area in middle management where we had the most ambiguity around safety expectations. What are middle managers expected to do when it comes to influencing the workforce to work more safely? Well, let's just think of this micro example here of the pre-shift safety meeting. What might a middle manager need to do in order to influence a high quality pre-shift safety meeting? Anything? Well, let me ask you this. Let me take that away. I want to ask you a question. Whose job is it to make sure that the frontline leader organizes it effectively, facilitates it effectively, involves others, and positively recognizes people when they do what we expect them to do? Whose job is it to make sure that frontline leader does that? Isn't that the middle manager? The frontline leader reports to the middle manager. So it's the middle manager's job to hold them accountable for running an effective pre-shift safety meeting. Now, so how do you do that? Well, let's think of the 5 elements of accountability. First of all, I need to make sure they know what to expect. So the expectations are laid out, and I've trained them how to do it well, and they have the resources they need to effectively organize and facilitate that meeting. So now I have to move into measurement and feedback phase. How do I measure their performance? Well, maybe I need to attend one every now and then. On the screen, it says attend once a quarter. Well, that could be an expectation that my boss has of me to attend one pre-shift safety meeting per quarter and assess its quality. I need to pay attention to it while I'm there. I can positively recognize people when they do what we want them to do. Then I need to follow up with a conversation with the frontline leader and talk to them about how that went, give them my feedback, positive recognition for what they did well, coaching to improve or what needs to improve. And another thing I could do is share wins up. I could, if I have a frontline leader who's doing a great job with this new pre-shift safety meeting, I can share that up to my boss as an example to them of what I'm doing to ensure quality in this process and keeping people safe by making sure they have what they need before they start the shift for the day. So that's some things the middle manager should do. Notice, now, by the way, if do you think the middle manager should also fulfill the expectations of an employee if they're attending a pre-shift safety meeting? Should they actively listen, speak up, and encourage others? Well, absolutely. So there's a role modeling aspect of the middle manager role as well. And the middle manager may even participate with the frontline leader in facilitating it. And then there would be a role modeling expectation there as well. So role model what you expect others to do, middle managers, and hold them accountable for what they're supposed to do using the 5 elements of accountability. Well, how about the top leader? Does a top leader have a responsibility related to the pre-shift meeting? Well, by now you're getting the hang of this and you say, well, yeah, don't they need to do something sort of like the middle manager did? Well, who's responsible for making sure the middle manager does what they're supposed to do? Attends once a quarter, pay all that. Well, isn't that the top leader? Don't they report to someone at the executive level? Now, if you're like Caterpillar, you've got multiple levels of middle management, but so you would move through middle management before you get to the top leader. So realizing there may be multiple levels in the middle, these same things would apply. Whoever you report to is responsible for making sure that you do what you're supposed to do, correct? So wherever that lies, and you eventually make it to the top management, and top leaders have a role as well, and it's very similar. They need to role model what they expect others to do, and they need to hold their subordinates accountable for what they're supposed to do. So how powerful would it be if a top leader is on a job site and we have just rolled out this new pre-shift safety meeting process, and the top leader attends that safety meeting to assess its quality and to pay attention to observe? How powerful would that be? Would that communicate to the crew and the frontline leader that this is really important and that the top leader really cares about the quality of these safety activities as they would ensure others to work safely? You bet. It's huge. You know, as leaders, especially as you work up the org chart levels, as leaders, we live in glass houses. People pay attention to what we do. They scrutinize it. They watch us, every move we make. As a matter of fact, they're talking about us, right? Sometimes when I'm coaching leaders, I say, maybe one of the best objectives we could set is to make sure that whatever stories people are telling about us are positive. They're the types of things we would want them to say about us to others. Well, how do we create those kinds of stories? We create them by the way that we interact with others. As a top leader, if I'm on the job site and I attend that pre-shift safety meeting and I positively recognize people that interacted well, that spoke up, that they actively listened, if I said a few things about that to everyone, Would that make an impact? You know it would. As a matter of fact, that would create a story and people would talk about that. Did you say no? They would tell others, did you realize that the president of the company was here? You know, he actually sat in on our pre-shift safety meeting and he and gave us feedback on how it went. I've never seen a president do that before. It would make an impact. So everybody has a role. When it comes to connectivity, when we're connecting safety across all organizational levels, everybody has a role. And we need to fulfill that role. The leader's role is three things, really. Number one, role model what you expect others to do. That's what we've talked about, right? Number two, hold your subordinates accountable for what they're supposed to do wherever you are in the org chart. And number three, you may also have some specific expectations in your role as well, like attend once a quarter. So really those three areas is what we can expect of leaders at all levels, to connect everyone in and drive accountability and connectivity into the organization. Everybody has a role to play. All right, enough about connectivity. Let's move on to domain number 3. Demonstrate credible consciousness. Now, what in the world are we talking about? Tom Hayes said that claiming that you are what you are not will obscure the strengths you do have while destroying your credibility. So credible consciousness is about creating credibility, about demonstrating credibility. Do those that we lead view us, see us as a credible safety leader? Are we credibly conscious? So what does that mean? Well, consciousness, that's how we think and process information. And credibility then is, can people rely on us? Are we believable? Are we convincing when we talk about safety? Or do we look like someone or come across as someone who's only checking the box? I'm talking to you about safety because boss told me to, and it's something we need to do. So here. Well, that's not very believable. Do I really care? Do I really have safety as a strategic imperative from my perspective? Do I demonstrate that every day? So you can see some of the synonyms of credible consciousness: awareness, understanding, knowledge, believability, convincing action, sound decision making. Do people think that the decisions I make make it a safer place for them to work? Do they understand why I make the decisions I make? So when a leader is credibly conscious, he or she understands the safety processes in the team. If you're going to oversee and provide feedback to people about their safety performance or performance of any kind, you need to understand what they're doing, right? You need to have a basic understanding of their processes. A credibly conscious leader has the necessary information to make wise, informed safety decisions. So do you make your decisions based on information that makes sense? And is that what people you lead see in you? We need to be able to effectively appraise risk where they exist. So I've got to have a basic understanding of those processes so that I can appraise risk and interact appropriately. I need to internalize safety concepts and apply them personally. Now, what are we talking about there? If I'm credibly conscious, then safety means something to me. It's a part of the way that I lead. It's a part of the way that I live. And I can tell you some stories that demonstrate that. Let me just give you one from my perspective. I was attending a conference in Tucson, Arizona 2 years ago. And I had, as a matter of fact, I was on the agenda for an hour to discuss an overview of this methodology. And the first day of the conference, there were 60 leaders there, and they were all executives who were concerned about safety in their organizations, and folks from our team. So we had about 60 people, and they bussed us to dinner that first night. And there were 30 on each bus, 2 buses. When I got on the bus, sat down, and we take off and we're on the way to dinner. My elbow hit a piece of metal, and it got my attention. I looked, and I noticed I had a seatbelt. Well, I don't know about you, but my attitude, idea, and belief about seatbelts on buses is formed from when I was young and rode school buses to school, and there were no seatbelts. And I don't ride buses much since then. Haven't. So my paradigm, if you will, the way I see seatbelts on buses leads me to think they're not there. And that thinking is so strong, that belief is so strong that I don't even think about it when I get on a bus. And that's the truth. My elbow hit the seatbelt, and I noticed I had a seatbelt. Guess what I did? That's right. I put it on. Click. I put on my seatbelt. Now, did I stop there? Well, of course not, because I'm a high performer. I want to influence others. So I looked around and I noticed nobody was wearing a seatbelt. And so I said, hey, everybody, we have seatbelts on this bus. We ought to be wearing our seatbelts. This is a bus full of safety leaders, executives and safety leaders who aren't wearing seatbelts, demonstrating unsafe behavior. I thought to myself, what if their crew saw them in this moment? What would they think? Well, if once realizing we have seatbelts, if they put the seatbelt on, well, that's a good behavior, right? I'm incredibly conscious. I became aware of my situation and I corrected my behavior so that I was more safe. It's funny, on the seat back right in front of me, after all that occurred, I realized there was a sign. Guess what it said? Please fasten your seatbelt. I didn't even see it before. And then I noticed at the front of the bus, big bold letters up high at the end of the aisle, safety first, please fasten seatbelts. Never saw it. That's how powerful the attitudes, ideas, and beliefs are in our minds and our conscious thinking that drive our behavior. We can't even, it's a barrier. I couldn't even see those signs, didn't see them at all until I became aware that we had a seatbelt and I was behaving unsafely. Now, credible consciousness, what am I saying here? Well, when I tell that story, do you think that demonstrates to others that I am concerned about safety? Does it influence you to think that Dave he's nuts on this thing, or safety is really important to him, and he's trying his best to live his life in a manner that's safe, to demonstrate that, to role model that, and to constantly improve his own behavior? Well, I think that's what I'm trying to communicate. And I think that's what stories like that do for folks. So you've got a ton of them yourself. I know you do. How about around the house? When we express concern for people's safety outside of work, what does that say about our attitude toward them? What does it communicate to them? Well, hopefully it communicates that we care about them, that not just at work, where we have something to gain from their performance, but we also care about them at home. We don't want them to get hurt. And isn't that truly how we feel? So we want to make sure that we communicate that. Those stories help to do that. They also see that as a credibly conscious leader, I continually learn and grow in my ability to lead others towards safety. And I think I just demonstrated that. I freely admit to others that I'm not perfect and I make mistakes all the time. As a matter of fact, I want to create a connection with them, an interactivity with them where they feel free to let me know when I'm doing that. If I walk onto that job site and I don't have on the proper PPE, I want somebody to say something for two reasons. One, I'm unsafe. So I want them to say something because it'll help me to work more safely. And number two, my intention is to follow protocols. And if I'm not following protocols, then I need somebody to let me know that. Now, it'd be great if they do it in a tactful way, but I can't control how they communicate with me, but I can certainly control how I receive that. So even if they say it in a very harsh way, I'm going to say, thank you for letting me know. And I'm going to go put my hard hat on, because that's how I need to behave as a leader. And I'm constantly growing in my ability there, always learning, always improving. That's credible consciousness. So we've discerned two elements of credible consciousness, and here they are. Knowledge. This one's pretty straightforward, I think. To be credibly conscious in the eyes of those we lead, we need them to have convincing belief that we know what we need to know in order to lead them safely. Well, what is that? Do we need to know everything about safety? Do we need to be certified as safety professionals? No. But we need to have a basic understanding, like we talked about earlier, of the processes in that team and how to keep people safe. Is that all we need to know? Probably not, right? How about, would it be helpful as a leader if I know, understand, and can improve my ability to perform as a leader around the 14 things that Caterpillar Safety Services has learned through their research we need to demonstrate on a daily basis? Would it be helpful if I try to grasp understanding of these 14 elements in 4 domains and strive to improve them in my own leadership performance? Is that knowledge I need to have? I hope you think it is. That's one reason we offer it. We want leaders to improve. We want leaders to lead more effectively so that the people we influence behave more safely. So knowledge, do you have the knowledge you need to lead effectively? If you don't, how do you improve it? Easy, right? How do you improve your knowledge? Many ways. You're doing it right now, I hope. You're attending a webinar. It's one way to improve your knowledge, increase your knowledge. You can attend conferences. You can read books. You can read magazine articles. You can read, oh my goodness, what about the internet? You know, there's no excuse anymore for us as a leader not to know what we need to know to lead effectively. It's all out there. If you know how to use Google search, then you can learn. So there's no excuse for us not to have the knowledge we need to do the job we need to do. Knowledge, it's a critical element. And how about number 10, reasoning? Reasoning ability. What are we talking about there? Well, reasoning is taking the knowledge that you have, combining it with situational awareness of your surroundings and what's going on, and making sound choices and decisions relative to that situation. So people need to see us, observe us making decisions and choices that make sense to them when we're managing safety. Remember my my story about the underground miner hiding his shovel? Well, in their minds, their leaders didn't have strong, credible consciousness. They didn't understand why they wouldn't let him have a shovel. And that caused them to rate this area very low in that work group. So reasoning ability, taking the knowledge that we have and using mental processes like logic and so forth to reason through a situation and make good choices and decisions. So how do you improve your reasoning ability? There's a question for you. Well, I encourage you, since we have a short amount of time here, I would just encourage you to Google it. Reasoning ability. Now just Google it and you'll find all kinds of ways to increase your reasoning ability. Now, one way you can do that is through these mental exercises that help you exercise your brain muscle and help you to think through problems and solve them. Let's do one as an example. This one is relative to logic, so you have to use logical thinking and reasoning ability to answer the question on the screen. Now we have to, there's 2 assumptions we need to make here. First of all, I need you to assume that this is a bus. I know it's a drawing, but it's drawn to look symmetrical so you can't tell which way it's going. And then I need you to assume that the bus is actually moving. It's moving either to the left or to the right. Excuse me. So the question is, in which direction is the bus traveling? I'll give you just a second to think about that. You have a bus, you have what looks like 3 windows on the bus. Which way is it going? Now I'm going to give you what you'll probably think is the consultant's answer, and that is, it depends. It depends. And since we most likely have a global audience today, this will make sense. Depends on where you live in the world, and where you live, what side of the road do people drive on? Well, in America, we drive on the right side of the road. So now think about a bus. If you know that we're driving on the right side of the road, where is the door on the bus that people get on and off? In this case, wouldn't it be to the left? That would be the front of the bus, and it would be on the other side. We can't see it. So the bus is traveling to the left. If you live in a country where people drive on the right side of the road, does that make sense? The door is always on the side where the sidewalk is, or where people will be getting on and off. So if you live in England or Australia, they drive on the left side of the road, then the bus is moving to the right, because the front door where people get on and off is going to be on the other side of this image, on the right side of the bus up there. So they'd be moving to the right. Does that make sense? Now, you didn't have all the information available to make that decision, but you can discern it, you can deduce it by using logical thinking. That's using your reasoning ability. And by doing exercises like that, you can actually increase your ability to reason through situations. There's many other ways to improve your reasoning ability, and I encourage you to Google it and explore that a bit. It's pretty fun, in my opinion, and it's pretty fascinating as well. All right, so knowledge and reasoning, incredible consciousness. How about domain number 4? Let's wrap up our discussion of the 4 domains and 14 elements. Build trust. Now, this is not a new concept to most people. Trust is the one thing that changes everything, according to Stephen M.R. Covey in his book, The Speed of Trust. That's a good book, by the way. If you want to understand how trust is a strong, effective business strategy to help you accomplish your business objectives, it's not just that warm and fuzzy anymore that it used to be. This book will help you do that, so I encourage you to pick it up. Most of us know what trust is. It means we can count on people, right? You can count on someone to do what you expect them to do, what they're supposed to do. They behave with integrity and so forth. It's reliance on the integrity, strength, ability, and surety of a person or a thing. So you can trust in that. You have a confident expectation relative to that person. It builds hope. If those we lead trust us, if we have built high trust there, they know what to expect from us. And they can have a reason to hope that we'll be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish as a team. You can see some of the synonyms there in that last bullet point. Authenticity, genuineness, transparency, sincerity. So when a leader builds high trust, they demonstrate care and concern for their own safety and the safety of others. They're accessible and available to everybody they lead. We make ourselves available. We foster an environment of free-flowing communication that inspires others to trust us. You know, we've already talked about a lot of the things we've talked about so far are demonstrating or building trust as well. And they see that we value safety as core. It's one of our core values. And they see that because of how we behave and talk. So what we've learned is that when we get to trust, that if we have done a good job driving accountability in those 5 elements, creating connectivity and demonstrating credible consciousness, we've gone a long way toward building trust as well. They're related because trust is built through communication. And all of those other things we've talked about are describing how we interact with others. So this is a further development of that thinking and building trust. And we can measure these things. There are 4 elements of trust. We'll get to those in just a moment. Let me ask you a question first, just to get you thinking a little bit. I want you to think of someone that you highly trust. Get a person in your life that you trust. I want you to think of a name. All right. And my question is, why do you trust them? And I'll bet you that they demonstrate some of the characteristics and behaviors you see on the screen right now. I'll bet you that's somebody that you can count on to keep their commitments. Or if they can't, they'll call and let you know. They're straight with you. They're dependable, open and honest. They listen, passionate for what you're working on, transparent, sincere. They show loyalty. They try to make things right. They're real and genuine. You see all of those? The people that we trust demonstrate these types of behaviors. And most of these came out of the Speed of Trust book that I mentioned earlier. So these are some of the things we can do. We can demonstrate these ourselves if we want others to trust us. And we can look for them in others to build and strengthen our trust. If somebody that works for me doesn't keep a commitment and they don't communicate with me that they're not going to be able to keep that commitment, then I'm going to have a conversation with them about keeping commitments. We'll say, here's what I expect. If you can't do what you agreed to do, I expect you to tell me, and let's talk about it. Let's reset the goal. Don't just ignore it, for crying out loud, because that, if there's a pattern of ignoring a commitment like that, then I'll learn that I can't trust them to do what I need them to do. So I'll talk to them about it. So there are 4 elements of trust: care, value, openness, and interaction. Do they really think that we care? Do we sincerely and genuinely care about their safety? And do they see that? Do they believe that because of what they see in our behavior and what they hear in our communication? Do they think that we value safety? Is it a core value of mine personally? Remember those stories we talked about in Credible Consciousness under reasoning? I can share stories of how I've reasoned through situations and safety was important to me. Demonstrates that I value safety. When I say something to someone about their safety, it demonstrates that it's a value and that I care. Do I create an open environment? Can they come to me and talk to me about things? Will they openly share about a near miss they personally had? Will they speak up about that? Do they feel safe to speak up? There's an element of psychological safety involved here as well, and it really manifests itself in the trust domain. So do I create that kind of open environment? Do I encourage people to speak up, and do I positively recognize them when they do? Do I make sure that we have a safe environment that we can discuss things openly without retribution? And do I interact with them in a way that builds trust? And that's the screen that we just looked at. 4 elements to build trust. And when we demonstrate when we drive accountability, when we create connectivity, when we demonstrate credible consciousness, then we also are building trust. And when we do that, we create a workplace that's safer for people to work. Now, how do I know that? How can I make that statement to you with confidence? Well, let me share that with you now. Let's look at some of the data, and let's look at what people are learning, what organizations are learning about their leadership performance when they use this methodology to assess it and improve it. So let's take a look. All right. So one of the first of all, in our statistical validation study that Development Dimensions International did in 2017, we were able to make some statements based on the data correlation that they did. Now, let me explain to you. They took we asked the initial set of organizations that we assessed. Of course, we asked them the 85 statements and got scores on those from the people that they lead. And then we also asked everybody in the organization to rate the quality of 5 leading indicator processes. You'll notice the first bullet says strong safety leadership creates a safer workplace. How can we make that statement? Well, to do that, now we already have now the methodology to understand strong versus weak safety leadership. We can measure the 14 elements in the 4 domains, and we know we can have metrics there, so we know whether it's strong or weak. But how do we measure a safe workplace? Well, if you say incident rates, then I'm going to beg to differ. We don't believe that incident rates are an effective measure of the quality of the safety culture in a workplace. We know that you can be doing everything that you can think of to do to create a safe place to work and still have an incident. We also know that you can be doing nothing to create a safe workplace and be lucky and have no incidents. So incident rates, we don't believe, are the most effective measure of a safe workplace. Now, we do believe that over time, a matter of years, that if you're doing all of these things we're talking about, that you will show a declining trend in incident rates. But they are looking in the rearview mirror. It doesn't help you. We wanted to assess the true quality, the true presence of safety in the workplace. And so the way we chose to do that was to measure the quality of 5 common leading indicator activities or processes, if you will. Safety meetings, incident investigation process, hazard recognition and resolution, near miss, and what am I leaving out? Inspections. All right, there's the 5 safety leading indicator processes that most organizations have some type of expectation or process around. So we measure the quality of those to understand, do we have a high quality, safe culture here? And compare that to the leadership metrics from the 14 elements and 4 domains. That's what DDI did. They correlated those data sets. Simply put, the higher the score on the 14 elements and 4 domains, the stronger the quality of the safety activities and processes. So that's how we make that statement. We learned that leaders with more than 9 direct reports experience lower leading indicator performance. Well, I've always intuitively known that the more people you're leading, the more challenging it is to do that effectively. But I never knew what the number was. Now we know. At least our data analysis shows that the number is 9. So one thing to ask yourselves is, do I have work groups that are more than, where I have a leader overseeing more than 9 people? And if so, how does that affect my interaction with them or my assessment of their performance? So now we know it's more challenging. It's doable. We have leaders with large work groups creating strong, safe workplaces, but it's more challenging. Accountability is the strongest driver of the 4 domains. What does that mean? Strongest driver of what? Strongest driver of a safer workplace, of those leading indicator outcomes. So the data showed that accountability had the strongest correlation to the safe workplace metric. Now, all 4 domains had a strong correlation. That's why they're a part of the assessment, but accountability had the strongest. So if you're looking for a place to start to improve your leadership performance, I'd suggest you take a look at the 5 elements of accountability and assess your performance in those 5 elements. How well are you doing, and what can you do to improve? Trust was the highest predictor of reduced incidents. That's interesting, but not surprising. Higher level leaders generally outperformed frontline leaders. That one was interesting. We looked into that a bit and tried to understand it. We learned that there's a couple of things at play here. Higher level leaders typically have smaller work teams, fewer people reporting to them, typically, not all the time, but typically. Most of the large work groups appear at the front line. So that can affect those scores. And secondly, the front line is typically where the most hazardous work occurs. So the higher level leaders more often are working in less hazardous environments. So for those reasons, leading effectively is different. I don't want to say it's easier or harder, it's just different. So what we see are higher scores in the higher level leaders. I'll show you a graph on that in just a moment. And lastly, some of our own research within Caterpillar, we've correlated it to Caterpillar's Employee Insights survey. And strong safety leadership, we have learned, influences employee engagement, creates a stronger employee experience. So that's not surprising. If we lead more effectively, we create stronger employee engagement. We all know that intuitively. So some of the stats, here's the one talking about the larger work group. You'll notice that the data breaks right here after 8. So when you have 9 or more, we see a declining trend in the leadership performance. So that's the data aspect of that statement. Another one that DDI provided for us, employees, how often do employees fail to report near misses? Well, the higher the leadership performance score, the less often they fail to report. Or the positive way to say that would, they report more often. So stronger safety leadership encourages people to report near misses. That's not surprising, but the data shows that in the study. One more, the percentage of time my team does not work safely. Well, that's a lower percentage if you have strong safety leadership. People work more safely in teams that have strong safety leadership. Again, not surprising, but the data is demonstrating that. Speaking of the data, so when you choose to assess your work group, you get metrics like this. The wheel on the left, you can see the domains and the elements listed with their scores on that 1 to 5 Likert scale I mentioned. And the score in the middle is the overall score. This is the actual data from an organization we've recently assessed. And this one actually is pretty good. A lot of green there, but also a lot of yellow, so plenty of opportunity for improvement. And you can see on the right side of the screen, comparing at a domain level, the company scores to what we call the global scores, or the overall averages of all the organizations in our database. And this company outperformed the average in our database. So they're in the top 50% of our database. We can also do that comparison at the element level. And so here you see the 14 elements of the company scores and the global scores and the comparative data. All right. We can also then look at the leader levels. You remember I told you that what we normally see is that higher level leaders score better than lower level leaders. Here's how that plays out in the 3 leader levels that we break the data out: frontline, middle managers, and top leaders. This organization had a similar trend, although it was stronger scoring, but a similar trend. And that's usually what we see, not always, but usually what we see as the data breaks out in the leader levels. So there you have the 4 domains and 14 elements of safety leadership. You have a short, brief look at the data and some of the things that we've learned. Before I turn it over to Laura for questions, let me just mention one more thing to you. You know, when you're talking about improving your leadership performance, we're talking about personal change, right? And most of us know or realize that we have some level of resistance to changes in our life. Now, some of you say, no, I adapt to change very quickly, and maybe you do. But I guarantee you there are some things, or at least some areas, where you resist change to some degree still, no matter how good you are. And if you doubt that statement, I challenge you tomorrow morning when you get up and you start getting ready and you go through your morning routine, change that routine. Change when you brush your teeth. Or if you're a guy and you're shaving, change in your routine when you do that. If you shave before you shower, this time shave after your shower. And just notice how that affects your performance. We don't like it. And not only your performance, but your attitude. You might even get confused. You might even forget something. That's what's happened to me in this period where everybody's working at home and I'm not following the routine that I follow when I go into the office. So sometimes I get halfway through the day and say, you know, I didn't even brush my teeth yet. Well, I didn't even realize it because my routine's upset. That change affected my performance. All right, so what am I saying? Well, as leaders, what I'm trying to encourage us to do is take a look at ourselves in the mirror, assess our safety leadership performance against this methodology, and set some goals to improve. And that means change. And we know, if we know that we have some resistance to that, if we know that we don't change that easily, most people don't change that easily. We have to create some structure around it, some intent around it. Now look at the diagram on the screen. You have on the left a burning building. So we have an unsafe environment. We have on the right a safe environment, and the task is to get from unsafe to safe. And we see all different types of responses to that change that is needed. Hopefully, when you set your leadership improvement goals, you're like 5, 6, and 7 over here, and you just get on it and go after it. You set intent. You say if you keep a daily to-do list, you're putting things on your to-do list every day to positively recognize somebody for working safely, to pay closer attention to the people that report to you, to have conversations with them about their safety protocols and their environment, to listen better, whatever your goals are, and you hop on it. That's what the people here, or the figures 5, 6, and 7 demonstrate. Or maybe you're more like 2, 3, and 4, and you need some help. Maybe you need a little of encouragement. Maybe you need somebody to ask you a question every now and then about how your performance improvement is going. You need somebody to hold you accountable. That can be a peer, it can be your boss, it can be your spouse, it can be anyone. We call that an accountability partner. It's always good to have somebody that you're discussing this with. You know, something happens when we share a goal with others and we tell them we set a date when we're going to, that we commit to achieving that goal, we're much more apt to achieve it. And especially if we're having regular communication with that person along the way. So that's maybe you're in that category and you just need some help. That you're not going to jump right on it, but you need some help. Hopefully you're not like figure number 1. And that you're just going to resist totally and say, that's crazy. I don't need to improve my leadership performance. I don't even care. I think I'm good enough, and I don't care what anybody else thinks. That's the attitude of number 1. So hopefully nobody on the call is in that place. But my question to you is, where are you? Find yourself on your typical response. And when you try to improve something personally, how well do you do with that? Did you set New Year's resolutions this year? A lot of time, one of the most popular New Year's resolutions is to lose weight and exercise more, right? So, but what happens to New Year's resolutions with most people? I can tell you, because I've been going to a gym for the last 40 years. And I can tell you the gyms are real crowded in January, but by mid-February, early March, they're back to normal. Those new people that have come in with those New Year's resolutions have already gone back to their typical way of habitual behavior. And that's what we do at work. People don't change that easily. We have to be very intentional if we want them to do something different, and we have to drive accountability, create accountability around it. So hopefully our discussion today has given you some things to think about. And we have some more resources for you that you'll find in the information. And at this point, I want to turn it over to Laura. We have about 10 minutes, I think, left for some questions. And so Laura, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing today, David. And thank you for everyone who gave us some questions. The first question that we had come in was about accountability. They wanted to know more about why accountability is the most important of those 4 domains.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know I made that statement, and I guess I'm expecting you to trust me on that and trust the data. But why is accountability important? Well, first of all, I would say the data shows it is. You know, the correlation that study that DDI did for us showed that that accountability had the strongest correlation to those 5 leading indicator outcomes being delivered at a high quality. So the data shows it. Okay, but why? I mean, let's go a little deeper than that. Why is accountability so important? I would suggest to you that, not just as a safety leader, but as a leader or an organization in general, what happens if we don't build accountability around things we expect people to do? What happens? Let me ask you it another way. Have you ever had your organization try to implement a major change initiative? Just think back, if some of you worked through the 80s and 90s, then there was the quality revolution, TQM and Edward Demings and all that. And more recently, there's the lean revolution, working lean, Lean Six Sigma, black belts, yellow belts, green belts, all of that. Has your organization ever tried to implement a major change initiative? And there was a lot of hoopla around it at first, a lot of investment of time, energy, and effort and money, a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions. But a year later, nobody was saying anything about it anymore. What happened? Why? You probably got a T-shirt. I've got a bunch of T-shirts from initiatives like that. What happened? Well, my suspicion is that we didn't build accountability around all of those new expectations of things we expected people to do differently. People don't change that easily, and they don't like to change that much. So if we're trying to get them to change, we have to be very intentional about it. How do you do that? It's through the 5 elements of accountability. Accountability is the key to sustainability of any changes we're trying to implement. Or if we want people just to sustain their performance level, we need to pay attention and give them feedback. So accountability is the critical element. It's the secret sauce to effective implementation of anything you're trying to do. So there's my opinion of why it's so important. And we also have the data that proves it's the strongest correlator. Good question.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, David. The next question we had wants to dig in a little deeper to that data. Can you talk a little more about what the data indicates leaders struggle with the most?
Sure. I have that in front of me, as a matter of fact. So of the 14 elements, the one that scores the lowest in our global database, that's the average of all, we've assessed 28 organizations. That represents right at about 1,000 leaders that we have data on, and that also represents over 7,500. I think it's 7,532 total participants giving us feedback on their boss. So with all of that input, the lowest scoring element is reasoning ability in the credible consciousness area. The data indicates that of all of these leaders we've assessed, that we struggle the most with reasoning ability. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have reasoning ability, in my opinion. That means that what people see in us oftentimes doesn't make sense to them. The decisions that we make, the choices we make, many times doesn't make sense to them. And so if that's true, then how can I impact that would be the next question. and I can change the way that I communicate with them to try to address that. Now, if I had this data on me personally, I'd go to my team and say, team, I noticed you don't think I'm strong in the reasoning element. And then I'd look at the 5 or 6 item statements that make up that metric, and I would ask for more input from them to help me understand what they see in me. And then I'd work to improve that. So safety reasoning is the lowest scoring. It's a 3.81 overall on average. It's still in the yellow. The average is still in the yellow. You got to be below a 3.7 to be in the red, but it's the lowest scoring element. A couple of the others in the bottom 4, one of them relates to accountability. It's measurement. So they don't see that we pay close attention to their performance. And then feedback is right next to it. And then they don't believe that we provide good feedback to them, especially positive recognition for when they do things right and safe. So that's the lowest, many times the lowest, one of the lowest scoring item statements in the assessment is in the area of feedback. So there's a couple of, I could go on, but we have them listed out in order from strongest to weakest based on the data. But I'll stop there for time's sake. So there's just a couple of them that they say we need to improve on.
Great, thank you so much. We had a question come in about leadership potential. So in your experience, the question is, can everyone be groomed to be a leader? If it is possible, why is every leader not successful? If it's not possible, what does it take to identify a probable and successful leader within an organization?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In the book that I wrote, I asked it this way. I said, are leaders made or are they born? I think that's getting at the same thing. Can everybody become a leader? Does everybody have the potential to be a leader? And I guess I would answer yes and no. Are leaders made or born? Well, let me ask you this. Let's look at it this way. So I think there are some people who have innate abilities that lend themselves more easily and stronger to becoming an effective leader. Some may have stronger innate ability there than others. Does that mean that the others can't be effective leaders? And I would say no, it doesn't mean that. See, if leadership is a skill, then it can be taught and learned. Can some people learn it more quickly than others? Yeah, like everything, right? Now, you might think, I would say this, if you want to be a leader, if there's the desire and the motivation and you enjoy what that looks like, being a leader. See, it's not easy being a leader, so be careful with there. It's a lot of hard work. I mean, I've got personal experience with that just with Caterpillar. When I was leading a team of 10 consultants, I had so much extra work to do because I was a leader. I'm not in a leadership role right now. I don't have any direct reports in my R&D role. Well, I'll tell you, that freed up a lot of time for me to focus on developing new products like this assessment and this methodology. Just a lot of time involved in effective leadership. You just think about leadership's a one-on-one relationship, right? You can't lead in mass. Now, you can communicate some things to the whole group at the same time, but not everything, because not everybody's the same. So we have to adapt our styles to people. We have to lead on a one-on-one basis. And the larger your team, the more time that takes. Leadership is not easy. So be careful if you say you want to be a leader. You might want to look into that. But if you do, if you have the desire, where I'm going with that, if you have the desire, then I believe if you have just a reasonable amount of mental capability, you're not handicapped mentally or anything that would affect the way that you process information and think and can relate with others. If you have, just an average or reasonable mental capacity, you can learn to be a good leader. These skills can be learned. There are specific things you can do and change what you do to be a better leader. So in that regard, I think, the answer is yes. Anyone that really has the desire, because it takes work, can learn these skills as long as they have the basic physical ability to do that. So now, and on the other hand, like I said, some adapt to that more easily than others. So I think it's both and. not either or. Are they made or born? Both and. Are they, can anybody be a leader? Yes, mostly. I hope that made sense.
Thank you so much, David. It looks like we're almost out of time. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and for answering questions. And thank you everyone who tuned in. Thank you for listening actively. Thank you for sending in your questions. Thank you so much for attending our safety leadership workshop. If you'd like to receive more information about safety, about Caterpillar Safety Services, please visit cat.com/safety or email Valerie Thiel at Thiel_Valerie_J@cat.com. Also, if you'd like to receive a copy of our white paper on safety leadership, please scan the QR code with your phone and we'll get you connected with that resource. Thank you again, everyone, for attending today's workshop. We hope that you have a wonderful and safe week.